So in this next iteration of our recipe project, we're going to make a few changes again to our web page using cascading style sheets. One of the first things that we want to do is go ahead and increase the font size on our page. If you take a look at the font, it seems to be a little bit small. Maybe we'd like to have it a little bit larger so that the text is easier to read. So in order to do that, we'll go into the body tag and we're going to set our font size to a percentage. And in this case, we'll increase it by 20%. So setting it to 120% does that for us. Refresh the page, and you can see that our font size has increased. Now, one of the other things that we want to do here is change the width of our page. We want to do some changes in how the page responds to width as the user resizes the window. So what we're going to do to change that is we're going to go through the process of manipulating some of the elements within our F12 tools just to get an idea of some of the issues we may run into. So within the F12, we'll set the width of our page. And in this case, we're giving it a specific size. Now you might notice that what took place was that our header element is no longer expanding across the entire width of the browser window. And that's because the whole page element was resized into the smaller size, right? So we've done this on the body tag. But we want that header element to be across the entire page. So we know that this creates a problem. So let's go ahead and clear that style from within the F12 tools, and let's go make some changes in our CSS file. So the first thing we're going to do is, rather than change the whole body width, we're going to change the width of the article elements. This allows us to manipulate only specific items on the page itself. So the first thing we're going to do is change the minimum width. Let's go ahead and refresh the page and see what happens as we start coming down to a smaller size. You'll see that the article elements will only shrink so much. We've specified a minimum of 30 rem on this one here. It's also good to set the max width, and we'll set that to 50 rem for this particular instance. Let's refresh and see how that impacts. You'll notice a small change in the article width, and then we can resize the page and see how our min and max widths work. Finally, we're going to go through the process of manipulating the margins a little bit on this page as well, and we'll do it with the article element. So we're going to specify an auto margin for this particular instance. Let's refresh. You'll notice a slight change in the margins of the articles, and then you'll see how those change as you resize your document. Now let's take a look at what happens as we scroll our page. Notice that our banner disappears at the top. So we want to fix that. We'd like to have that banner remain static. So we're going to do that. And because the banner is specified in the H1, we'll go into our CSS and we'll set the position to fixed. Then as we do that and refresh the page and scroll, you'll see that it no longer disappears, but it's not the right width anymore. So we have to fix that as well. Let's go back in and specify the width for the H1 element. And because we want it to span the entire page, we'll set it at 100%. There, now the banner's looking a little bit better in the width size, but notice as we scroll and also now look, there's a little space at the top. We need to get rid of that. So we can do that in the CSS, and we'll specify a top, setting a value of 0. And on the refresh, our banner now positions itself, or basically anchors itself to the top of the page. Now our nav menu is partially covered, so we need to fix that. So because our nav element is already specified, let's give it a specific width, and let's set its position to fixed as well. Also, let's change the top so that when we set it to 4 rem, it brings that nav menu down a little bit lower, and now we can actually see the whole menu. The problem is now that it's covering up our images, so we can fix that too by specifying an opacity value in here. Setting the opacity gives it somewhat of a transparency, and if we set it to 0.8 and refresh our page, we can see that now we can look at some of the image behind it, so it's not completely covered up. But the problem may be that with that opacity, maybe the text isn't easy to read. We can fix that by manipulating something called the hover. Now we don't have a nav.hover in our cascading style sheet yet, so we'll go ahead and add that. So it's simply nav, and hover, and this basically covers the action for when the user hovers the mouse over that nav element. And what we'll do is simply set the opacity back to 1.0. Now we can see how the opacity changes when we hover the mouse over our nav menu. Now we're almost finished, but notice that we've got some text that again is still hidden behind that H1. So let's fix that by setting up our margin. In this case we want margin top. So we'll specify margin top, give it a value, and then refresh the page, and now you can see that they've actually scrolled down a little bit more. So we fixed those issues at the top. So these are the final changes to our recipe project for this unit.